Hi everybody, welcome to English 123. This is a short video providing some feedback on one student's rough draft submission. I chose this because this rough draft is pretty well developed, and also she's working with poems that I think many others are working on in this class, Singapore and the Secretary Chant. So I'm gonna be toggling back and forth between the original draft and then another draft that has my comments embedded in it, and I'll make both of these documents available uh, in our course file. So please follow along with the video, but if you want to look over the documents more closely after the video, I'll go ahead and make them available to you. Introduction states, I think that the definition of work can be accepted internationally and by all nature, no matter which gender category you fit in. The feeling for work is something that all people have in common, no matter what jobs they serve for. This is a good introduction in that it sets up the topic, but my comment is that anytime you begin with an I think phrase, it doesn't lead to a very strong sort of interesting statement. And I would suggest to the student here that perhaps you could start with just even a rhetorical question, such as what is work? Because it's such a familiar term. We use it all the time. But what's interesting about this term right now for us is that these poems provide different angles and just different perspectives and make what's very familiar to us a little bit unfamiliar. And I think that's something that you could use in order to introduce the topic in a little bit more engaging way. I've also in bold just smoothed out some of the phrasing, and you'll see that difference between the original and then this revised one with comments. Let's go to what I think is really strong in this introduction, which is the fact that right away the student makes clear what the similarities are between these two poems, that they both help readers arrive at an aspect of work that is important. That is, the definition of work transcends boundaries. It defines gender and the social economic. And here I think you need a noun to accompany the adjective socioeconomic. But she's basically thinking about gender and class, and I think that's right on. And I like how this thesis sets up this notion that even though these poems are pretty different, a closer examination of both poems kind of express something similar, and that's going to be the connection that the essay will clarify, and that's kind of the so what, right, undergirding this writing project. So I also like the fact that it gives a preview of what's to come. So, for example, I would expect this writer to focus on symbolism and word choice, because these are terms that are mentioned in the thesis statement. And so oftentimes you can use the thesis as a way to kind of structure the rest of your essay. All right, let's go back to, oops, the rough draft. Says the poem Singapore by Mary Oliver explores the aspect of work through the view of the speaker describing a working woman at restroom in an airport of Singapore. A darkness ripped from my eyes. The speaker brings the negative word darkness at the very beginning of this poem, which is impressive enough to decide the poem's whole atmosphere. The way the speaker describes the working woman makes reader sympathetic about her because of her job cleaning a bathroom. When the woman turned, I could not answer her face. Her beauty and her embarrassment struggled together. I want to stop here, and I want to suggest that the student make an effort to make greater connections between the quoted lines and the ideas. So, for example, This is a good observation, noting how the speaker says a darkness was ripped from her eyes. And she says this is impressive enough to decide the poem's whole atmosphere. And maybe there could be one more like piece of evidence that shows that what you're saying, the poem's whole atmosphere is somehow like dark. You could say, furthermore in like line 23, and I'm just making this up, but you could maybe cite another line that goes back and provides support for what you're saying about darkness kind of being pervasive about the whole atmosphere. But I think overall, the student does a nice job providing textual evidence, but you want to always make sure that you're introducing the quoted lines properly. Just even with inserting a phrase like by stating that a darkness ripped from my eyes, the speaker brings the negative darkness at the very beginning of the poem, just kind of smooths out the grammar a little bit. This person does a nice job citing the lines, so you want to cite the actual lines. And I like how we can see the lines skipping from one to another by use of the slash mark, which is the proper way to indicate the line numbers. One more thing is that since you're introducing Singapore and the reader is not familiar with this poem, I would just add one more sentence briefly describing like the content of the poem, like what's going on overall. You could perhaps have a statement such as, the speaker is surprised and embarrassed to see a woman washing an ashtray in the toilet, and as their eyes meet, she realizes how work does not define who you are. I mean, that could be kind of a general statement that you could make about what Singapore, the poem, is doing. Nice use of different words and phrases and pulling out these details to make your case here. I mean, I think this is a good substantial paragraph that introduces Singapore and focuses on word choice. But as you wrap up and as you sort of try to move on to your next paragraph, I think you need to add one more sentence that reiterates the point of this paragraph. And then as you shift gears into the secretary chant, you really need some sort of transitional expression. And I would suggest something like this. In contrast to the perspective used in Singapore, the point of view in the secretary chant is different. Okay, and then the next sentence just describes what that difference is. So again, the strength of this next body paragraph is that there's good use of textual evidence, and the student is expressing and explaining what the secretary chant is doing. But as I'm kind of reading, the rest of her rough draft, and she just has a note about how paragraph 3 is going to have differences and similarities. I'm kind of worried that the rest of the paper is not going to have enough direction. And so I just put in bold suggested outline of ideas. So already there's that introduction and thesis where you promise a discussion of word choice and symbolism. And the first two paragraphs, I think this first body paragraph, you could actually, strengthen this idea that you're examining word choice a little bit more just by clearly stating, having a statement such as, the use of various words and the connotations of these words, are important in Singapore and help us to understand what work is in the poem. And similarly, you could also kind of provide a tighter focus for the secretary chant and what you're doing. Again, you're examining word choice, and then end with a discussion of the difference and similarities between the two poems. In the following third body paragraph, I think you want to shift back to Singapore and then, inspect it from a different angle, which is going to be through its use of symbolism. And I think, or I would anticipate that the student would look at the language about birds and rivers that comes out in the poem and what that would symbolize. And then the secretary chant also has a lot of objects, not so elegant as rivers and birds, but has a lot of objects that also symbolize different things. So that could be another nice pairing of an aspect of both poems that you're going to be comparing and contrasting, and then wrap up with a discussion of the difference and similarities. And to conclude this kind of essay, I would really encourage you to conclude with a meditation on what these poems say about the nature of work. And some questions you might want to address are the core messages about work ultimately similar in these two poems, or are they very different? Does it matter that these poems are about women and their work? That is, about gender. So as I'm kind of going through this, I feel like there's a lot of promising things in this essay already, and it's very important to keep going back to your introductory paragraph. Make sure that you are delivering what you promised to deliver, because the student raises a couple key terms like gender and socioeconomic class, also symbolism and word choice, and I would expect all of these key ideas, right, to be addressed in the rest of the body paragraphs. Okay, so that would be my preliminary kind of feedback for this person. I think there's a lot of good groundwork that's already laid out. It's clear that she has a good understanding of both Singapore and the secretary chant, but I think overall just want to work on organization and transitioning effectively between body paragraphs. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll be responding to different questions you have in the video.